Okay, we waited for you. We're not starting to, she's here now. We can start.
Hello there. It's great to see all these friendly faces, and thank you very much for attending today. I think everybody's in for a real treat. My name is Anthony Cuellar, and I'm Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Snader and Associates. And while we are the title sponsor here, we really couldn't do this event without some real key sponsors. Canon, of course, is presenting, showing some phenomenal technology. Christie Digital has a 14K projector, 14,000 lumen projector up there. You'll be seeing some wonderful footage. And of course, 3210. What a wonderful place to host this event. I mean, this is fantastic, isn't it? But really and truly, you know, this is the community. And we at Snader love doing things like this. Many of you have come to our shows, and boy, it's nice to do it just down the road, I'll tell you that. So again, thank you very much for coming. And I want to introduce some key people here tonight. Tim Smith, he just walked away. There, Tim Smith, who has really been with Canon for many, many years. He's got a new title. He's now the Advisor to Film and Television Production, which is a real fancy title to say that he has the best job at Canon. But Tim is truly an expert in this medium, has been working with these cameras for many, many years, and frankly, really is a great presenter, so we're going to look forward to hearing from him. So he'll come up and speak in a minute, and then our keynote, Richard Crudo, will come up and show his new short, Max is Back, which is actually a mini version of a larger feature film. But he'll come up, then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. But right now, let's welcome Tim Smith.
Hi, Adam. Right in the front row. That was quite an introduction. Thank you. I didn't expect that. And I'm not sure what an advisor does, but the company just thinks of me as a tool they could use. So I want to be the biggest tool of the company. So let me give you a kind of a history of how we got here. We've not been in this business very long. Matter of fact, we gave birth to this camera on November 3rd of last year, so we're not even at our anniversary date yet. But it wasn't just when we gave birth to the camera, it's when we entered the cinema business. It was when we officially said, we want to be in your industry. Yes, we've done great things with still cameras, and we've dominated the still industry, no question, and the consumer industry, and the printer industry, and all these things. But this is the next step for us. This is where Canon is going. We want to be a camera that's respected the way an Area is respected, or a Panavision type of company, and that's where our resources are going. And it's going a couple of reasons that way. One is it's good timing for starters, and iPhones are kicking the shit out of the rest of our business. So we got to go somewhere, and that's sort of what we're doing. So I, like he said, have been kind of with Canon for now 22 years or so, and they came to me originally and said, because I've been pushing HDV tape and all sorts of cameras forever down in Hollywood, and said, we've got a real camera coming now, and we want to make some movies. And I'd known Richard for a while, and he had a chance to, he was going to make a film, actually, that you're going to see on a 5D, and we kind of said, just wait a little bit. So we found a bunch of filmmakers. Richard was the first one we went to. He's the first person ever to shoot a frame of footage off of the C300 in the world. And he won't probably talk about that too much, but we did put him through some hoops. We gave him prototypes that didn't have labels on them. We had wires sticking out the side. And we made a movie. And we also got these cameras on a Thursday, and I think we were shooting on Monday. So they came through customs Thursday afternoon. We shot tests on Friday morning, and we looked at them Monday, and then started making this film that he made. Also, this film is, he wrote it, he produced it, he directed it, and he shot it. So he's personally invested in this. It wasn't just a test. So I publicly really appreciate the leap of faith he took in this camera. But it's not our last camera. We already announced the C500, our 4K version of it. We also have the 1DC, which is a 4K SLR. So, and a series of cinema lenses will be out this year. We've got 3 primes and 2 cine zooms. It'll be out hopefully by, we're saying by 2012, which in Canon speak is December 32nd. So at some point between now and then, we will definitely have those pieces out for you guys to see. We had one of the prototypes of one of the lenses here. They are spectacular. The zooms I have not actually seen, the new small cine zooms, other than mock-ups. They look like they'll be really good, but we'll see when they get here. But the primes are excellent. We didn't have any of those lenses for this series of films that you're going to see. What we had were the EOS lenses and the large cine primes that you saw out there were used on both of these. What we're going to do is, I know Anthony has prepared kind of a presentation for Richard. So he'll give you Richard's background, and we're going to show Richard's film, and then we're going to let you ask him questions. So, thanks.
Well, you can tell we're kind of ad-libbing this. He could have announced Richard probably better than I could, but
there's not much to tell.
I don't know about that. I had the pleasure of spending some time with Richard here earlier this evening, and he is a pretty modest guy. But one of the things we chatted about, besides some of the great films that he has been involved with, he's also doing a television production that that I happen to grow up in Kentucky. So if you've ever seen the show Justified, there's the DP on that show, and I love that show because, again, I grew up in Kentucky. But Richard has also been the president of the ASC for 3 one-year terms. So this gentleman certainly knows a lot about our business, and I highly encourage you in the Q&A to take advantage of having somebody with his gravitas here, really and truly. So Richard has also been involved in a number of films, as I mentioned, that go back quite some time. Some you certainly know from a theatrical point of view. American Pie. I'm sorry, I'm running down to earth.
I don't remember them.
I could go on, but you know what? I don't need to go on. He's the keynote. Please, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We need to switch it on.
Good. You're on?
It's on the top there.
There we go. Good. Thank you. This short film was drawn from a larger feature, a feature-length piece that's actually still in progress at the moment. But the images here more or less were cherry-picked to illustrate what the camera can do, and what little narrative we were able to force onto it came out of that, so it just makes a little sense as it goes along. The actual movie itself is somewhat different from this, what this might lead you to believe. Nonetheless, what they both share in common is the absolutely magnificent performance of this camera, of the C300. I am, you might guess by looking at me, a film guy. I came up through the film era, of course, and very, very fond of film. My heart, my soul is made of celluloid. Nonetheless, the reality is those days are done. And if you look at the history, we spoke about this just a little earlier with Anthony, if you look at the history of what we do, cinematography and filmmaking, images have never really stayed the same for very long. You know, films of the 20s have a particular look, the 30s, the 40s, right on up until today, or even from 20 years ago, films look different. Things don't stay the same very long. So what we're living with now, we've gone through a big change moving over to digital, and it's all but complete. I mean, film, the war is over and we lost. Doesn't necessarily mean we were wrong, but we lost. And that's okay, because we have to embrace the future. And that said, we've got a whole bunch of exciting new emulsions to play with and look at now, which really is what it comes down to at the end. We're recording on a new emulsion. Digital is just a different emulsion with somewhat different characteristics. And the job of the cinematographer as such has also expanded exponentially compared to what it used to be in terms of just film. You put whatever it was you were shooting on the negative, and you go and print it, and you could pretty much walk away and know exactly what you're going to have, and not too many people could mess with it. And if they could, they really couldn't mess with it to too great an extent. Nowadays, the job has grown, especially in the sense of post, and the nature of what happens in post, it's become more incumbent than ever that the cinematographer remains with the project right through to the very end to finish that image. So regardless of what you're doing on the front end, your job is never going to be finished until you actually get there at the back end and govern it right through to the moment where it comes out that port up at the back of the theater. That said, once again, the new emulsions, the digital media that we work with, offer us vast opportunities for things that we couldn't do previously. You know, if the definition of progress is that it allows you to do something you couldn't do before more handily, more easily, allows you to do your job better in a more creative and effective way, then we really are onto something tremendous with what's happening in the world in terms of digital. This camera, the C300, you know, if you saw these images here and they impressed you on any level whatsoever, what Tim said is exactly correct. We came, took it out of a packing crate that was right out of customs, right off the airplane. It was in customs for how long, Tim? A week or 10 days? I mean, we were fretting. You know, we were fretting getting the camera just to test it. And the tests that we did were so simple and so elemental, but for my methodology, exactly what I wanted to do. To explain it in very short order, it's a carryover from my film background in which we used to call it an emulsion test. And we just put somebody up against a wall with a black show card, white show card behind them, split the frame, and then shoot a series of exposures in half-stop increments over and under. And then we would print it a certain way in the lab and then take a look at it and make our judgments from there about the latitude of the film, grain structure, exposure, what happens in terms of what the laboratory was capable of in terms of saving a negative that was improperly exposed, what exposure means over and under at the lens when you want to expose a certain way for effect. You would think that this doesn't apply on the digital side, but it absolutely does. And this camera responded in the most amazing way right out of the box. And Tim wasn't kidding either. There were no labels underneath the buttons on the settings. I mean, what did you ultimately refer to set anything? Just P-touch and just started putting yeah. We had an issue with overheating because the assistants were plugging up the heat sinks with tape, and we learned not to do that. But other than that, we shot in the summertime, grueling heat conditions, in, out, day, night, all sorts of conditions without a hitch. And I treated this chip and this camera, I treated this camera just as it was another emulsion. I used my light meter, okay? This might be anathema to some people today because people are always going to the monitor. They go to the monitor, you know, Video Village and the monitor and what's happening, you know. I never was able to bring myself to do that, and I still can't. And I'm glad for it, because monitors are tremendously misleading. Even under the most exquisite of circumstances, they're never going to be the same. There's always some sort of drift. You know, you've got some LUT working, you've got the DIT doing something, and we had no DIT. We had a sort of a data wrangler, but he wasn't a DIT in the sense of applying any look or anything like that to our footage. Just treated it as another emulsion. I'd read my light meter. The native setting for the camera is 850. Optimal setting to get the full dynamic range out of the camera itself would be an EI or a ISO, ASA of 850. Through the testing and some consultation with Technicolor, who was handling the back end, I determined for my taste and for the applications that we were doing that a 500 setting would be more appropriate. Someone else might take the camera, someone else might have a lot of experience with it too and come in here in 2 minutes and tell you exactly the opposite of whatever I might say here today. However, what I'm saying to you is purely my experience. I should say this heads up straight out of the gate. This is purely speaking from my experience and purely based on my taste. My taste. Someone else might look at it and say, you know, I'm not so crazy about that. Well, then you take that and you do it your way and you make it the way that it works for you. You can split hairs about stats with cameras. People get hung up with resolution and pixels and all kinds of things that really only matter to engineers. I'll take all of that into consideration. Certainly you need to know about it, be advised, understand it, but only to the extent as you understand how it serves, what it looks like. You know, for me, the ultimate thing is to sit in the theater or sit at the lab or at the post house and watch what's on the screen. And I don't, at that point, if they come and tell me, I look at something and I like it, and I say, how was this done? What'd they do? And they tell me they was shot through the bottom of a Coke bottle, that's just fine with me. I'll take it. If it has the look or the feeling or whatever that thing that just hits you in the pit of your chest where you know that's right. If I can find that, I don't care what the technology is. That's really the bottom line, is what's on the screen. I would advise everybody, don't get too hung up in saying I have to have the latest thing with the highest resolution and the greatest number of pixels and the greatest bit depth and what have you. All these things are important, but they shouldn't override your taste. So to get back to the original point about the meter is a constant. It doesn't change. No matter what happens, I'll set that thing, and whatever's there, I put up a lamp, press the button, or if I use my trusty Spectra Professional, there's not even a button. Just hold it up the dome, and I watch that beautiful little needle move. It's so much fun. It's so old-fashioned, but it's so much fun. It may be old-fashioned, but it is effective, and it is correct, and it works, and it is, above all, consistent. It does the same thing every single time, which is a concept that's become somewhat diffuse in the digital age. You know, with the film era, you could go down to Kodak, Fuji, take any roll off any shelf in any one of their warehouses anywhere in the world. Look at what it says on the can, 500 ASA. You can take it or leave it, but let's assume we go by their recommendation. Take it out, expose it, bring it to the lab, time and temperature. Take it out, you need a light and a lens, and you can show it anywhere in the world. And you can talk to somebody in the laboratory and say a point of blue, half a point, or 4 points of density. Half stop of density, a point of magenta, cyan, doesn't matter. You can talk and it means the same thing to everyone in every instance. Not so on the digital side. You can say, you know, call the colorist and say, you know, the stuff looked a little cool today. Tomorrow I want you to make, you know, 1/8 of an inch less of a twist on the red tracking ball to the northeast. You know, this is imprecise and it is misleading. And unless you're there with your eyeballs on the screen, you'll be in for a surprise most of the time. So the meter brings us back to the concept of consistency and measuring the light for effect. You know, the meter will tell me what, just because the meter says a certain stop or a certain value doesn't mean that that's what I will expose at necessarily, because there's a whole other process going on in your mind at the time for the effect that you're after. You know, do you want the key light over, under, at key, normal? It all depends on the stop that you're shooting at on the lens. You're going to predetermine your stop. You know, you're not going to say, well, you know, every shot's going to have a different reading because whatever light falls on the subject, I'll read the meter and expose at that. That's entirely the wrong way. You know, there's no consistency to that. And you're going to change the characteristics of your lens, and you're going to have a different look from shot to shot. It'll take the viewer out of the movie. It'll cause, they might not know why, but it'll cause a change in the emotional value of what you're doing. So again, the meter was my guide on all of this material. And exposure, I was brought up in such a way by some very good cameramen when I was an assistant and learned about exposure and how important exposure is and how you must obsess over it in your choice of exposure and how you do set your values in the shot. Once you absorb that, it's very hard to step away from it. And I wasn't about to do it on this particular project. I wasn't about to change my internal working methods to accommodate a new piece of technology. What I wanted to do was incorporate the technology into my working methods, which I could teach anyone here in 15 minutes. It's not that complicated, and that's the beauty of it. It is simple. It is simple. And the camera did fit in immediately right out of the crate. My meter, key, and fill, like every other shot I've probably ever done in my career as a cinematographer. And we composed for 240, a widescreen composition, which we would, in the old days, call scope or anamorphic, Super 35. There is a difference in between what the digital camera manufacturers refer to as Super 35 size chip and what motion picture cinematographers would think of as Super 35. We think of Super 35 as an aspect ratio. And Super 35 as an aspect ratio was a way of, it's still a valid way, it is a way of shooting a film with spherical lenses that will give you an anamorphic size frame, a widescreen composition, a 240, 235, 239, something that would be referred to as almost a widescreen composition, 2 1/3 to 1. How would a manufacturer refer to a Super 35 size chip? That would mean that the chip is...
And we would do it in resolution.
In resolution, yeah.
1005,
Yes, it's a resolution issue to the manufacturers. To us, we think of it, as I say, as a compositional factor. And I've always been a big fan of anamorphic cinematography. Not necessarily Super 35, but anamorphic in the sense of using an anamorphic lens, which in 35mm photography uses the greatest amount of real estate on the 35mm negative. And the lenses have a different quality, a different sensation when the focus, depth of field is a little different. You'll notice that highlights that bloom in the background are, instead of being circular or oblong. There's a number of different just perceptual things about it. But most of all, what I like about it is the widescreen composition. It just seems that wherever the camera falls off the truck, there's a good composition. It lends itself to a graphic. And you can be more extreme, of which there are not terribly many examples of extreme composition in what you just saw, but it lends itself to a little bit more of an extreme graphic, an extreme composition. You can push things out further towards the ends of the frame. And there's a lot more going on in the frame. You can let things play. You can let scenes evolve, and you don't have to, it's not necessarily as cutty as say 185, something like that. So that's why we chose to do it in a wider screen format. But all that meant was generating a 240 grid inside the eyepiece and composing for that. And we've done it, and you see the result here. It worked out quite well. There were no issues really whatsoever with the camera, and I've used it quite a lot since. I probably have about as much experience with it as anybody around at this point. And I would carry it pretty much into battle anywhere. I've used all of the major cameras, the Red and the Alexa, and we're waiting on Panavision, has a new one coming out at the end of the year. Everybody's stuff. And this camera certainly, in this current guise right now, you got to understand this is as bad as it will ever be. And already I really do believe that it deserves to be in the first tier conversations when somebody's trying to think about what technology to use for their movie. Today, as much as anything, post-production drives the front end. And I think it's just a question of time before this camera gets out and people use it on reasonably sized productions, and they'll see that the post side of it is really very, very simple. We came out of the camera on CF cards and transcoded and went right into Final Cut, I'm sorry. Maybe Photoshop eventually too. But right into Final Cut, and it's been a very, very simple, painless process thus far. No issues there whatsoever. Questions? Yes?
What ASA were you shooting at on your night scene?
500. I set the camera, I set the meter. The question was, what ASA did we shoot the night scenes? Those scenes you see on the street where the guy is walking along at night, that is available light. That is on Pico Boulevard in West LA. And we were setting up one evening to do some work on one side of Pico. And I just happened to look across the street, and there was a little spot where the street bent a little bit, it turned a little bit. And as the cars would come up, when the light changed, all the headlights would hit that, and then they'd curve around again. And I said, hey, that's pretty cool. Let's put them over there. And we shot that with the Canon 400mm lens, just with whatever was there. That was headlights.
2.8.
At 2.8, wide open, with the 400, and no supplemental light whatsoever. And you can see that there's plenty there, and there's no noise, there's no grain or anything like that that might be interpreted that way. All that night stuff was shot that way, and the low light capabilities are what really are amazing about this camera. You'll be out there at night, and in my film head, I'd go, oh, that'll drop off in the background, and you'll never see anything there. Well, with this camera, you do see it, and you have to be careful. It's almost as if you have to start to change your thinking a little bit and start to say, well, maybe I don't want to see that. Now maybe the job becomes I have to take light out of there, you know, which unheard of doing at night. But you'd much rather have that problem, certainly, than the other of saying, oh gosh, we got to put up another condor with an 18K 8 blocks away just to put a little light in that patch back there. Well, you don't really need to do that. You could, you know, just let it be in most cases. If there's a street light anywhere near there, it'll be fine. You'll pick up an amazing amount of detail at night. And inside, interiors that you're lighting, you find you need very little fill light. Very little, if you need any at all. You know, sometimes you put the key in the right spot, you don't need any fill, but you're going to need it in certain instances, and when you do, just the volume of fill is minuscule. In most cases, I would use a 1 foot take a 2-bank Kino Flow, 2-bank 1-footer, and just one tube with the egg crate and put it way back and on low output, and just, you know, you turn it on and off and you barely see it with your eye, but it makes a tremendous difference on what the camera picks up. You go from pitch black to dark as hell, but just with a little detail, just what you want, just a little detail. You can pick up the little bit of detail that keeps it from being just, you know, a total inky black. But to get to that point, you need so very little. You learn very quickly. You learn, it's a quick learning curve. A couple of questions up top, then I'll come down to you guys. Yes, sir.
So it sounds like 500 was your sweet spot. Did you work with matte box and filters, or did you use the internal? There's so many variables in the camera, like the ND.
Yes.
And the ISO. For
the sake of expedience, we did use a matte box in most cases, just you know, to keep stray light off the lens in most cases like that. In terms of the internal neutral density, we use those during the day, and they were very handy. They were very handy. You know, it saves the operator having to look through, you know, if anybody's ever picked up an N12, you know, it's like looking through a piece of linoleum. You know, you can't believe, you can't actually believe that light is going to pass through that. It's just so dark. And that used to be an issue. You know, Panavision was very good with behind the lens gels. For NDs, we put N12, we put it behind the lens. The operator didn't see the effect, so it was great. The Araflex cameras on the other side, you'd have to put glass NDs in the front, and if you put an N12 in front of a reflex finder, the operator is like literally, they may well close their eye. They can't see hardly anything. Yet the film is seeing it, of course. Yes, sir?
To continue the film analogy, is it a B stock or an A stock on the jet?
A B, I'm sorry, A or B stock, yeah. Meaning?
So whether or not it's balanced between a 3200 or
oh, I see.
400.
Well, you can.
Or is that totally variable?
Well, you can set your color temperature very, very handily internally inside the camera. In probably every case, day exterior, I just set it to 5500. In most tungsten situations, I would set it at 32. Since then, I've used the camera quite a lot in a lot of different situations, and I've tinkered with the color temperature as well. My feeling about color temperature, and not just about the C300 in particular, but in most cases today, on the film days, we used to obsess about color temperature. And for many years, and then gradually less so, less so, less so. In the days of when I started very early, there was 16 millimeter video news film. It had, I think it was ASA 25. And it was very cantankerous exposure-wise and color temperature-wise. And you had to really be spot on, and you had maybe a third of a stop of latitude. It was a really tough challenge, but good to learn on. And that was the one extreme. Today, even shooting film, I don't even hardly, color temperature hardly, unless it's for a specific effect or it's a gross inaccuracy, I really don't think of it very much at all. There's so much you can do in post today in terms of color especially that as long as it falls within a pretty generous parameter, I tend to not think about it too much, not concern myself, unless there's a specific reason and there's a specific effect and you're really trying to stay consistent within that. I really don't think about it too much in those terms. But in terms of what it delivers across the board, the camera's been amazingly consistent. I mean, when we went in to do the DI suite to do the timing of this piece, we were basically done. I think we had 2 hours as a time blocked out. We were basically done in a half hour or 40 minutes. And that even factored in some fooling around. I mean, it was a pretty straight, we didn't go for any extreme look. We just went down the middle of the plate a little bit, tipping the hat towards a 70s sort of feel. But not to a point where we were obsessing or you know, attacking every frame individually. The color timing was just, it was a cinch. It was simple. It was painless. And again, the first go round with this material. I think your engineers, the Japanese guys that were there, I honestly believe, and there's no response required, but I really believe when these guys first saw the tests and then saw the finished piece, I think it was the first time they had really seen it on a screen of any consequence, something that was not like lab-oriented or something that was not an antiseptic kind of test or some sort of test-like situation, test bed situation. They saw something that was done in the real world that had some little narrative thread go through it, that had, you know, a lot of different things at work. And saw it work, saw their technology actually come to fruition without any extraordinary effort. I mean, it was pretty much a batting practice fastball down the middle of the plate.
They got up and walked.
Yeah, they got up and touched the screen. Yeah.
It was a moment.
No, they were very impressed, and duly so. I mean, they did a fabulous job of putting it together, and it worked. You know, this was as much a leap of faith for them, I'm sure, as anyone. And I just happened to be the monkey in the space capsule. And it worked, and believe me, nobody was happier than me. But I've been a Canon devotee since, the 1970s when Canon camera, the AE1 was declared the official camera of the New York Yankees. I'm from New York, and I'm a diehard Yankee fan. And that was the AT1. They've always had good, solid technology, and there's no reason to think that this wasn't going to work. And it worked fabulously well. You guys first, and I'll come back to you. Yes?
Two quickies. One is, do you feel that the built-in neutral density compensated for infrared?
There were no,
satisfaction?
yes.
And the other question is, that at any point in the process, was the 8-bit depth of an issue?
No. Was the neutral density filters, internal neutral density, deal with any UV issues? There was no issue whatsoever. Infrared, I'm sorry, infrared issues. No, none whatsoever, although I've had to deal with those issues with other cameras. But no issue at all. They come in increments of 2 stops, which mathematically took a little bit of getting used to, but it worked fine. Once you adjust to that, you say, oh, well, 2, 4, 6. And, you knock it down 6 stops on a sunny day at 500 ASA, that's just about right. And, excuse me, I've been dry since I got off the plane. And you don't want to start piling glass in front of the lens. That's when the issues really begin. You can get ghosting and weird peccadillos. So, and the 8-bit, no, the 8-bit, you see it. And again, oh, thank you. Again, 8-bit, 12-bit, 16-bit, 10-bit, little bit. I go back to what does it look like, and in another case, maybe it's a different look or a different feel or maybe a different requirement. You say, I've got to go in a different direction. But this technology stands alongside everything else right now at the state of the art as being something that you can you can deliver the look that you want very simply, very efficiently, and very consistently above all. I keep going back to consistency. The best proof, probably again, I go back to the meter, the best proof of the consistency of the camera is simply the meter. And it's ironic that the meter does it, because you say, well, everybody's throwing their meters out today and they're looking at monitors, you know, and they, oh, let's pull a double out of that lamp, looking at the monitor, and it's like they're, you know, they're glued to the TV. You know, that's just the anathema to me. I just can't do that. The meter being consistent and showing that the camera met the consistency is what really is impressive. You know, that's really the thing. If I was out there just winging it off a monitor or off the eyepiece in the camera even, there wouldn't be a reference to say, you know, how far are we off the mark here in post? How far are we saving this? How far are we correcting a real boo-boo, you know? With the meter, it's almost like a one-light print. You know, you see it's the consistency is there, and instead of making grand corrections throughout, you're making the normal little adjustments, a little bluer, a little warmer, a little darker, a little lighter, but minor. You know, you could almost leave it as one and say, nobody's going to see the difference. But then once you get into it, you know, naturally you're going to find things to play with. So, yes.
Did you play with the gammas?
We used the Canon log, basically, and that's what set that feel and that look, and that's it. I mean, you know, I have colleagues, very dear friends, who will go in to the menus and have DITs, and it's almost like they can't, they become crazy about it. And I can't see being too wrapped up in, you know, once the horse leaves the gate and the race has begun, the train has left the station and you're in production and you're hanging on for dear life because it is a runaway train once it starts. You know, I don't want to think about any of that. You know, I want to do all of that. I want to do everything I can before the train leaves the station. You know, there's a million variables and only about 10 of them that you can really control. And as long as you've got your hand around the throat of those 10, the other ones you handle in your stride, but would never be able to wrap my head around going back to making adjustments in that area during production, especially when you have so much freedom to do it in post today. You know, as long as I'm in that ballpark of what I've tested and sort of, you know, with the director, and we've all sort of settled on something, and you can maintain that standard or something within that standard, and you know what you can do later. You know, don't complicate things. You know, the simplicity is always better. Always. When I was an assistant cameraman, I used to work with Gordon Willis, who was one of our great cinematographers that ever lived, and shot the Godfather films, a lot of the great Woody Allen films in the 70s, and tons of great movies. And in the rare moment when I could pick a spot and ask a question, and he would give me these, you know, these answers where I think he's blowing me off. But at the time, I didn't know. As I started to do the job, I learned, and some of his answers were so profound and simple. But he said it took him 30 years to learn to be simple. And it never made sense to me until it took me 30 years to learn to be simple. And I'm still trying. I'm still trying. It is hard to be simple. But the simpler the better. Your methodology, your approach to lighting, you just pare away all of the extraneous things that don't matter. And I see guys get caught up in things all the time that I just wonder what they're thinking about, when it really all comes down to what's here and how do I get it out of here and up there. And generally, sometimes you have to go to extreme or heroic measures and very complex measures to get something to be simple. But it's the thought process. That's what really counts. Of always keep your eye on that ball, you know, that simplicity. You know, don't mess with these things if you don't need to at this point. You've got enough to worry about making the day's work right now. Yes, there was one more here, then I'm coming to you guys. Yes, sir.
My question was kind of related to his. You talk about simplicity. Did you customize the camera to shoot at the most flattest and neutral profile, and then let the people in post take care of that in terms of like color? Or
well, the Canon log is not quite a, what would you call it, Tim?
It's a pretty light log, let's call it.
Yeah,
Not a
yeah.
heavy, you can still light to it. If you were going
want to light to something besides a meter, you can look at your video village and probably light the log. It's that light of a log, so you can see it. You can look at it without thinking, what happened to my image, that kind of thing. So that part went pretty easy. But the one thing that I think we did, just to be clear, that the camera I think was at 850 always.
Yes.
Metered at 500.
Camera was set the internal, the native at 850 in terms of ASA, and the meter at 500. And for whatever reason, that alchemy gave us a look that we liked. You know, which is not to say that someone else, I mean, some of the other guys.
Right,
yeah.
See the next three films that we also did after this film, they, you know, one of them was, he went all the way to 20,000, and for some of the scenes, and then some are at 850, 3200, and so on. This was old school.
But that's just me. That's just me, because I can't even balance my checkbook. Who can do the math all day long, switching things back and forth? And you know, that's why when shooting film, I like to use one stock. You know, there are people who will take everything out of Kodak's inventory, quickly dwindling inventory of stocks, and every time a cloud comes in, they're changing, you know, 12 magazines. The assistants are running, changing mag. I early on, one emulsion for the whole movie, you know, and if you're doing something that requires a look or some change up, well, that's okay, then you'll do something. But it's not, you know, based on lighting conditions. I always use whatever the finest grain, fastest stock I could get my hands on, which is 5219, 5218, 17, whatever it's been the last few years. And, you know, just use it. Pile the NDs on the day exterior, and as the light goes, you start taking the ND out, you know, and you can shoot, and no panic at 4 p.m., you know, where, oh, the assistant got to switch over from the daylight to the night stock, you know. It's the same thing with this now, you know. Set the camera at 500 and just treat it as such, you know, unless, of course, you're doing it for some effect or some other thing, which just in this particular instance did not apply. You know, it was the first time out of the gate. Let's just test drive it, you know. Let's fly from LA to San Francisco before we fly from LA to New York, you know.
There was that moment, though, where we took this deep breath and said, we're going to be okay.
Oh, sure, sure. Like at lunchtime on day one.
Yeah.
You fellas here, then I think, and then I'll come up to you, sir. Yes?
I just had a question. Real world experience, you look at you're talking 850 with your meter set at 5.
Yes.
What did you see as your actual, out there in the field, latitude stops above and below? Well,
you know, again, there's what, on the books, 13 stops?
There's 12 on the books, 13 in probably in a reality world.
Okay.
12, let's say 12. At 850, you're almost even. You're like 5.7 one way and 6.3 the other. So that gave us the 12 stops of latitude. But when he said that's why I said the optimal ISO 850, native is probably not that number. Native in the world is where you're going to get noise and what's this. That's a different, that's an Adam Wilk thing. But in the real world, we had about 12 stops of latitude at 850, and the look we wanted it at 500 ISO. So.
Okay, well that's you know, the difference between real world and spec sheet.
But you know, once again, these things are relative. You know, that's another thing I learned from Gordon. My great good fortune to spend time with him. Most of these things are relative. You know, you can say, you know, 80 million pixels, you know, 12, 13 stops of latitude. It's relative to what? It's relative to how you see and how you think. And, you know, the images that you see here, not just in this film, but in all the others, you know, as far as I'm aware, you're not going to see a grayscale anywhere in there, you know. And if you put up a chart, well, then you're starting to split hairs again. You say, oh, you know, it's not quite 12, 13, but it's almost 12 and a half. What does it look like? You know, when you're shooting at 2.8 inside this room and there's a big window here and it's high noon and, you know, you've got somebody in the foreground, well, that window, and you're exposing for the foreground here, 2.8, well, that window is going to blow out. And it's going to do that on film, too. You know, so again, that's something, I don't worry about it, and I don't think it's a terribly important concern because it's something in most cases you can control. You know, So if I see this blowing, well, however many stops over it is, I'll fill it in here and keep them under. You know, you find the happy ground. You fit the punishment to the crime. But to just look in the book and say, oh, this camera only has 7 stops of latitude, this one has 15, you know, it has to be relative to something. I think just saying that by itself, it can be very misleading. If you just plant in your brain, oh, many stops good, fewer stops bad, you know.
The
Yes,
numbers
sir.
are good. I mean, if like Anthony's BMW will go 10 miles an hour in a straightaway, how it handles in the corners is life or death. So, and it'll tell you that in the, you know, can you take the turn? And that's sort of, you gotta, anybody that comes to me, and I do get engineers all the time, that I work with one who I think for the first 3 months never looked at the picture. Just looked at the charts. And because he's a genius, and he's brilliant, and he's a wonderful man, but it's a picture. And, you know, filmmaker, you gotta look at the picture.
Well, it is your reference point.
Of course, it's
Yeah, of course.
you decide that, you know what, this camera gives me something that I need to go look at the picture.
Yeah, of course, it is a place to begin. But, you know, as soon as you see the first bit of test footage from wherever it comes from, then you start to compute your own. You've got to really take these things out on your own and break them on your own. I'm a big fan of that too. You know, we used to say, I want to take this emulsion out and I'm going to break it. I'm going to find out where it falls apart and what we can do to bring it back, you know, which kind of widens the net yet again, you know. Yes, yes, sir, and then.
Just getting back to your meter there for a second, you know, in my, as far as the real world situation, in my world, I use Zebra in the viewfinder, and I use the waveform monitor on a 17-inch Panasonic video monitor. How far off the track do you think I would get?
Well, I don't know if it works for you. God bless. I mean, using a Zebra in the Finder and a waveform monitor. I mean, the waveform monitor helped us arrive at the 500 setting on my meter. But I always find waveform monitors and histograms misleading because as soon as you put something, you know, you're photographing a gray wall, as soon as you put something in front of it, well, it's going to tell you your exposure is wrong. You know, it tells you, you know, any extreme.
Well, I'm talking about the key light, basically.
Yes, yes, but you know, when let's say, you know, the camera's moving.
This will make you a little more comfortable.
Oh, no, no, the standing's great.
Is it?
Yes,
Sure?
thank you,
All right.
thank you. No,
Okay.
no, I'm not tired, I'm thirsty.
Okay.
But thank you. You know, especially if the camera's moving, and you know, and a lot of lighting, once you know you're in it, you do it by eye to a great extent. You know, the one thing I lament on digital cameras is no optical viewfinder. You know, being another dinosaur from the film age, I used to love to light through the eyepiece. And no Zebra, no nothing. You know, you're seeing live what the lens sees. And that, you would calibrate your eye, you know, in a couple of days. You know, I always used to say I've got 5219 on the back of my retina. Because you just know when you look at something where the values fall and what's hot and what needs a little more exposure. And it's really easy and quick and simple. So, but if it works for you, great.
I will say, if you're a waveform guy, the C300 built-in waveform, 100% no grace. You break 100, you're gone. And that's the nature of that waveform, which is different than the waveform on your monitor, which again goes to his idea of consistency. But yeah, if you're going to waveform it and you're going to use the C300, don't break 100.
And the other thing about such things as histograms, there is a very popular, well-known digital camera manufacturer who I have a lot of experience with their camera, and it's great. However, you look at the histogram, and if you change the ISO of the same shot, you just do it at 400 and do it at 800, the histogram will change. It's not consistent. You know, it doesn't give you just a reading of what's there. You know, again, it's too complicated for my simple brain. The meter just tells me one thing and one thing only, and that's all I want to know. Yes, sir.
So, Richard, you were talking about you'd set the key light, and then you would decide how much fill.
Yes.
You put your little Kino, and then you said just the slightest amount of fill would be the difference.
Goes a long
Black,
way.
you know,
Yes.
a little bit of detail. How on the set did you judge that? were saying you
The meter.
really use the monitor.
The meter. The meter.
Just the meter.
Eye by eye, certainly in the meter. You know, after a little bit, you start to realize it's a recalibration from the way that I've been thinking. Whereas, you know, you look at it with a film head and you say, oh, it definitely needs fill. And, you know, you bang in what would appear to be a lot, but, you know, the meter is telling you it's right where it needs to be. Well, here you need a lot less to get to the same point, you know, that you would on film necessarily, but I use the meter.
You're using a ratio then? Like
Well, it depends on, there's no set rule. It depends on the mood of the moment, you know. The key is the key, whatever that might be, over, under, normal, however you set it. And then the fill, the amount of fill, that's what creates the mood, and it would depend on what's happening in that moment and how much of the subject needs the fill, you know. If it's like a face that's just sort of rimlet here and you want to open up the black that's overwhelming the face a little bit for effect, well then, you know, maybe 3 stops under key, you know, 4. You'd have detail at 4, you know. 3, you're starting to get up to where you would be in the old, on film, you know, 2 stops under. So, you know, it's just like a recalibration of your thinking in terms of how much you put in there, because the fill is what creates the mood, really, you know, always. I mean, you can look at something, and I do this with students all the time. We light a set, and then I say, all right, let's start and light it up like The Price is Right. You know, just flame throw it. You know, put a lot of light in there and just make it such that you couldn't create a shadow with an umbrella. And we do, and you know, you have them do it, and they look and they all go, oh, that looks good. Well, now we're going to show you how to make it look really good. And it just starts switching off the fill light. And you can see the effect immediately. You go, wow, now suddenly it's starting to look like something. You know, it's getting down and like shadowy. And even for a daytime effect, I'm not talking about film noir or something spooky or anything extreme. Just a normal, trying to recreate the feeling of what it might look like in this room at 2 p.m. on a sunny day with a window in the northwest or something, or northeast. And by reducing the fill and giving it some feeling and lighting more towards the lens, it seems to be something that we all respond to. People just like that. I like it. We all like it to look at pictures like that. It just feels good. Yes?
Was there anything that the camera didn't have that you wish it did have?
That's hard to say, you know. An optical finder, but I would say that about everybody. And I know the reasons why there isn't one. It's not a simple thing to do. It adds a lot of size and weight to the camera. It's a whole other thing entirely, and I fear that the days of optical finders may be gone. But if that's the price for, you know, progress, it's not that terribly big a price to pay. I mean, most people seem to have learned how to do without it, and I have, certainly. I'd still prefer to have it, but I can do without it. In terms of what it might have, I ask very, very little of a camera. And I'm always telling Tim and all of the manufacturers that I've ever dealt with, it's not so much what it doesn't have, it's what it has that it doesn't need. And take away. You know, you don't need all the menus, you don't need all the buttons, you don't need all these options. You know, some cameras have as many options to adjust the look of the image in the eyepiece as they do on the camera body itself. And what's the point of that? You really want to get confused? You know, let's have a different look in the eyepiece. I mean, this is not clear thinking. You got to take that away and just leave a consistent, you know, one thing that delivers the same thing reliably every single time. And on that level, the C300, you know, was fantastic. But
own the camera, there's a My Menus function where you can make a menu with just the stuff you need. And everybody should do that. I mean, there's kind of like if you got a 6-year-old, you got to teach them how to use a knife at dinner time, but you don't have to give them 14 knives in front of them. That's just create the My Menus function, put in there what you need. And you know, somebody you had asked earlier about, you know, doing custom settings.
oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm so dry.
With notes saying this is defective. And I think, you know what, you can't be defective, they're never break. And I'll turn them on and I'll look at the settings and I think, what the hell were they shooting? You can't push the red that far and expect the image not to look wrong. And so you gotta just keep it simple. Every film that we shot, they work differently, but but they kept it simple. There's a million things in that camera that only 20 people need. So know the menu system with just the stuff you're gonna touch. You know, and if you're gonna rent, if you're a renter, you can take those settings and store them to a card. So just keep the card, and when you rent, put it in the card and upload those settings. And just look at what you look at. Don't look at the rest of the stuff.
See, I didn't know that. or I forgot. More likely I forgot, actually.
I didn't know what either.
Well, yeah, generally I would say it's more about taking away and simplifying, you know. That's always my bugaboo. I would love to get it back to a point where, you know, it's just a motion picture camera, a movie camera, just all it ever did was just move film through a black box. You know, Arriflex, Panavision, Aton, Bell and Howell, you know, right down the line since day one. And, you know, there was a beauty in that, the simplicity, reliability, you know, simplicity. That's all that does, and it does that really well and consistently. Yes, sir, I saw a hand up there.
Since Shooting Max is back, have you or anyone you're affiliated with managed to get a chance to stick some actual anamorphic glass on?
Has anybody put an anamorphic lens on there? No, not that I'm aware of. And I believe that would be a back focus, and the rear element would be sticking through the chip most likely. You know.
I haven't had anybody do it successfully yet.
You know, we've tried other, you know, I was just saying to Tim, I have a set of super Baltars at home that date back to the 50s or 40s, and I just had PL mount put on them. And I want to stick them on the camera to see what it looks like. I have a good friend that has a red camera, and we put them on his camera. The red people, some of you might be here, love the combination of super Baltar lenses with the red camera. They just have a different quality, and they take some of the edge off and soften the image a little bit without really apparently losing any resolution. They also seem to, what I noticed with my buddy's camera, they seem to suppress highlights a little bit. They seem to make the camera hold the highlights a little better, which is really weird because it's a very primitive coating on these cameras, and the coatings of today's lenses are, you know, just off the charts with what they do. But I wouldn't understand or know what the mathematics behind that is, but it was something that we definitely saw. And I would love to put the Baltars, the super Baltars with the PL mount on a PL mount C300. And I'll bet the look would be fantastic. It probably is a terrific combo. And we'll let you know. Yes?
What lenses did you use for the main action?
We used the two new cinema zooms for a lot of the movie.
Okay.
What is it, 30?
14.5 to 60, 30 to 300.
There you go. 10 to 1 and 5 to 1. 2.8 lenses there? 2.8? 2.2? 2.2 and 2.9. Yeah, you know, about around 2.8 lenses. And they perform beautifully. The cinema lenses, unfortunately, the primes weren't quite ready yet at that time, but we had an EF mount for use with the EF lenses, the stills lenses, and you know, for places where we needed a prime or we couldn't get the big lenses in or something like that, handheld or Steadicam, and they were beautiful too. I've been using those recently, the EF lenses, and they've just been out of sight, gorgeous. I mean, if anything, Canon lenses are stupendous, absolutely beautiful. What is it, the 16 to 35 that we love?
35, 70 to 200.
70 to 200 is a workhorse, and also the
85 1.2 is spectacular.
yes.
I mean, it's not ideally designed for motion picture, but the image
No,
is
the image is
spectacular.
amazing. Russ Carpenter is a cinematographer who won the Oscar for Titanic, actually. Russ shot some stills. You saw the ones he did on the beach in Santa Monica? He shot some stills with the 85, what is it, a 85 millimeter lens, f1.2 lens. Shot it at night. I don't know what ISO rating, but it wasn't off the charts. It was not probably like 800 or something like that. It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't 12,000 or 20,000. On a moonlit night down by the beach, and the angle of the moon over the water, and he was down on the beach right by the shore, and the moon was lighting the humidity in the air, the mist basically off the ocean at that hour. And the glow of the moon on the ocean surface and the mist lighting, it's just an astonishing photograph taken, you know, with this lens. It is beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
You're talking about Russell. I saw him last week, and he's doing that Steve Jobs film. And he got lenses from each era. He's
Yeah.
doing Alexa and C300, but
Yep.
you know, he found lenses from the 70s and from the 80s and
Yep.
so on to kind of get that feel.
Yeah, lenses, you know, lenses are, there are so many choices today, and you know, that's a whole other factor entirely. You know, lens is nowadays is really quite the important thing. Panavision, I know, is coming out with some part of the new thing that they're coming out with at the end of the year. They're repurposing their entire lens inventory, and all the lenses. For years, I had a set of ultra-speed Panavision ultra-speed lenses. I used to use flat lenses, and we had gone through, my assistants and I had gone through about 150 lenses to find this particular set, and we held on to them for about 5 or 6 years, and I used them on a bunch of movies. And the youngest lens, the youngest piece of glass we had there was from 1973, and they just had a different feeling. I never liked the Primo lenses. To me, they were too sharp and too contrasty. These had an entirely different feel, and I still have the serial numbers written down. I don't know if they're exactly the same, if they haven't been tampered with, but I mean, they could be tracked down and put together again. But that was a specific thing, to get a look that was just something that you felt good about, you know? And you could take that someplace else from there, but at least you started from a known quantity. Once again, consistency. Yes, sir? You had a question?
I was just going to ask, if you were going to buy one of these cameras, would you buy it with a PL mount or with the...
Oh, I don't know. That would depend on what I foresaw as the primary use, you know.
It sounds like you like to use a lot.
Well, yeah, you know, I've been very fortunate to use all of them. You know, it would depend on what the primary use I saw. I mean, I own a bunch of EF lenses and a bunch of Canon lenses, so it would be real handy to have that and use and just pick them up and use them at any time. But then again, you know, if you want to take it out on a feature or on a television production, the PL mount is probably going to be the choice, simply because, you know, you've got all those lenses and all that history of them. And one thing is also it helps the assistants focus marks and what have you, and pulling focus with the cinema lenses with a PL mount is a big advantage.
Well, feel free to buy one of each.
Yes.
Still no adapter yet. Why not make it one?
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
There is an adapter though.
I was going to ask you, were there any visual effects shots in...
No, no visual effects. If you stick with what's coming up, you're going to see effects out of your mind. Great effects work in one of the later films that'll be coming up in a little bit.
Do you know if was that stuff shot on green screen?
There's one film coming up called Exit, which is 90% a green screen film.
Okay.
You'll see Yosemite and stuff like that. We were there for that, but all the stuff that has that Blade Runner look is all green screen.
Yeah, and it looks amazing.
If we run this other one, would you be able to comment?
Sure. Yeah, I was at all. Should we do that after we're done?
I'm off. When you say when. How are we doing?
Well, how are we doing on time? Everybody have all the questions answered that you wanted to ask?
Yes, sir.
Did you operate on this?
No, I had 2 operators. I had my hands full. Just in terms of operating, I've done plenty of it, but operating is a full-time job. And a lot of cameramen will tell you they like to operate their own cameras. A lot of the European guys like to do that. They're brought up that way. I've done it, and it's a great job. And it's a lot of fun. It can be very gratifying. And there's a lot of, not just the mechanics of it, but there's a lot of artistry involved. You really have to have an eye and be able to move on the fly and turn things into, sometimes, you know, the silk purse out of the sow's ear when things go bad. But nonetheless, in my mind, it's a full-time job, and I need somebody who can do that, worry about that, bring something to it, and free me up to do the lighting and anything else I might have to handle. Yes?
You
you spoke about the C300 being one type of emulsion, 19 being another emulsion that you're used to using with. You talked a little bit about the difference between the two sort of emulsions
Yes.
in the shadow area. Is there any other sort of general comments you can make in the way that you sort of approach the images off the C300 than you would have if you were?
Well, as with all digital media at this point, you've got to watch your highlights a little bit. You know, on film has gotten to the point, you know, it's becoming extinct, and unfortunately it's been perfected. It's becoming extinct at the point where it's become perfect. It holds highlights so tremendously well, and it sees into shadows pretty well. But as with all digital media, you know, you just have to watch your highlights a little bit. I can't think of one instance in which I didn't, there wasn't one instance in which I didn't do a shot because of that, or avoid doing a shot in a certain way because of that. You know, you just, as long as you're aware of it and you can attenuate it to some extent and you know, hopefully collapse it into your parameter, it's fine. If something blows out, well, who cares? It blows out, so what? You know, we let it blow out on film too sometimes. You know, and sometimes it's a good tool and it's a good method and it's a nice look. You know, again, the 13 stops, you know, you don't always have to be within that parameter. If you think in those terms, you'll find yourself very limited. So it blows out, so who cares? The window blows out. You don't see the detail in the window, who cares? You know, you see it in films all the time. Why can't you see it in digital? And if you want the detail, well, we've got any of 1,000 methods to bring it down into the ballpark and make it work for you, you know? I didn't find it, I think the real answer is I didn't find it constraining in any way. It didn't stop me from doing anything at any point.
Why don't we take 2 more questions?
Yes?
Does it blow out gracefully?
Yeah, it's not a crippling blowout. It's something that you can live with when you see it. You know, I'm trying to think of a good example in this one in particular. It's the second or third shot in of the sick-looking lady that peeks around the wall looking at the guy. And behind her are level lower blinds on a window. And if you just, it's gone now, but if you happen to look at that, you'll see the detail, you'll see the level lower blinds. Outside, the exposure in the house there on her is at about a 2.8. And God only knows what it was out in the yard because it was daytime, you know, so it's probably a 32 or something at the same parameter. And yet, you can still, it's blown out, but you can still see the outline and the detail of the levelers there, which is actually quite an achievement because it should, in most cases, would blossom in such a way it would just be a white splotch, you know, so it's, and it would have been simple to fix if it meant something. You know, put some netting or some ND over the window and fixed. Simple.
So, if you were to summarize the characteristics that define the camera that you like to apply, what would be?
Summarizing the characteristics of the camera that I'd like to apply, I would say consistency, which is amazing for the first 2 of them that came out of the box, you know. Consistency. In no way, to address just the previous issue, in no way was I constrained by anything about the camera. I didn't change my working method, nor my expectations of what I was going to see, not one single bit. That would be the bottom line of the whole thing. And those would be the 2 most important things to me, regardless, film, digital, whomever, whatever manufacturer. If they can deliver those 2 things primarily, it's not going to constrain, you're not telling me don't do that or you shouldn't do that or you should avoid this. And I know that it will be consistent in what it does do. Then right there is the top and the bottom line. Don't need really very much to know after that, for me personally. Someone else might say, you know, I need a cappuccino maker attached to it or something, but I'm a simple man. One last quickie.
What monitor were you watching at?
I didn't look at a monitor. Honestly, I did not. There was a monitor, I don't even know what he had on the cart. And I was too busy to go look at the monitor, you know. In terms of watching the actors, I like to stand next to the camera anyway. It's just a lifetime's habit, and I'm not, I'd rather stay away from the video village. Just, I've always felt that way, so.
Well, Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
So, I'm sure everybody's thirsty and hungry. So why don't we take a little bit of a break? There's food and drink outside. We are going to continually run 3 more films, I think.
We have 3 more, yep.
3 more, and we'll just keep them going here in the theater. So obviously no food and drink in here, but help yourself, and then feel free to come in. Obviously we have some wonderful associates out there in the stage. So please drop by the booths, ask all the questions, and both Tim and Richard are here. So thank you.
Yeah.
How long are the films that you're showing?
All 3, if you watched all 3, probably 20 minutes.
Oh, okay.
They're all short.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.